Okay, right. I'm not someone that would ever claim to be a big book reader, right? I've read a few books in my life. I have a very small collection of books, right? Recent books and old books passed down to me, right? But the reason I would say I still think it's important to read books, and everyone has their own way of reading books and their own time of reading books, right? But there's this thing called superficial reading, right? And some people endorse it and other people don't, right? I'm not particularly a big fan of this idea, because you see why, right? Superficial reading is something people do when they want to pick up big words or big books and big concepts that they're not yet ready to understand, right? They don't have the background information and research and referencing to understand the concepts and the vocabulary in these books, right? So these books you'll find are more specialist books, right? Whatever study or thing the book is written about, right? It's more of a niche specialist book, right? So the vocabulary is going to be tailored to that profession, to that ideology, whatever it is, right? Now, superficial reading is something that people will do when they've been recommended books, or they've seen that people they look up to or like or influenced by read these books or recommend them. Because a lot of people recommend books that they haven't actually read and understood, right, comprehended, but they do it and say it to be cool, right, to get points, whatever, right? But superficial reading is what a lot of people do, right? They pick up these books that they're not ready to understand yet, and rather than every time they come across something in the book, going and researching it, yeah, they will just pretend they didn't read it, right, and they'll just skim over it. So what this essentially does is waste your time, and you fool yourself into believing you've actually read and understood this book when you really haven't, right? You've just wasted your time to say that you've read a book, right? And that's foolish. You're only wasting your time, right? Because you're not fooling anybody that's adept in the concept or the information in the book. You're only fooling yourself, right? That's superficial reading, and a lot of people do it just to say that they did it, right? And I believe it's a waste of time. Now, me personally, like I said, I'm not the biggest reader, right? But I have interests, and I have a lot of times when I read and I study things, right? Because it helps me get back grounded, or helps me prepare myself for the next level of something I'm getting into, right? So my advice, or how I do it, yeah, well, some books are easy to read and easily enough written to just breeze through, and you understand the concepts, anecdotes, stories, whatever, right? Some books are easy like that, right? Then there are other books, right? And one in particular that I've been reading is actually taking me a year to read it, right? And it's not because it's heavy vocabulary-wise or even heavy in its concepts, right? It's such a, I don't know if I can say, a compendium of ideas, right, and stories and mythologies and theology and psychology and philosophy, right? And I'm not just saying those things because they sound cool. Like, the book is actually about that, right? It's about history, but the way it breaks down history is all these different topics, right? So it takes somebody to actually be committed to reading it, right? It's not just I'm breezing through this book and I'm getting all these anecdotes and ideas, right? You couldn't do that, but it's a waste of time, right? So I recommend, what I personally have to do, right, is when I'm reading it, I'll come across words that I have an idea what they mean, but I let go of my ego and I Google the word straight away, right? And the quickest way to do this is to just have your phone open next to you, right? And when you're reading it in your mind, you come across a word or a person, right? Because I do it with people too, and concepts, right? When you see a word that you don't understand fully, or it's interesting enough, or a person you've never heard of and a concept you've never heard of, you just hit on your Google tab, you hit the record button, like there's a little speech, like a microphone button, you hit it and you say the word into it, right? The reason I do that because it saves time, especially with getting the correct spelling and going back and forth, right? You hit the button quickly and it will come up with a dictionary, and it will tell you can hit the speaker button and it will read the word back to you, right? So not only will you get the correct pronunciation of it, you will get the meaning as well, right? I recommend doing that. It takes a lot longer to read books, but you're doing it in a more honest and humble way of your understanding of the concepts and the vocabulary and the people, right? And I do it like that for a reason. This is why it's taken me so long to read this particular book, right? Because every chapter is its own thing, right? And its own concept, its own history, and its own philosophy and important people, right, that they reference in it. So I do that, right? And I'll find myself, because like we've already spoke about the problem of algorithms locking you into one subject matter or one way of seeing things, right? This breaks the algorithm too, right? The book will give you new references, new data points to go and look at, right? So you'll end up Googling these people, right? And if they're interesting enough, you'll take their names over to YouTube, right? And then you'll find a whole load of different video topics sometimes, right? Because some of these historical figures aren't written about enough, right? But you'll find all of these things, like a whole rabbit hole, each person's dialogue or way of thinking and philosophy, right? Then you go off and you find yourself in a couple months of taking in and understanding this information, which is just one chapter, right? And it might even just be one paragraph in this chapter, right? So it takes a long time to actually read and comprehend books when it comes to subjects you care about, right? That's why I would recommend you do it, right? And it's not just to be anal about what you're learning, right? Because there's a time and a place for that. Because most of us are self-taught anyway. After school, it's your responsibility to keep studying, right? It doesn't matter what grades you left school with. It's your job to keep studying and learning, right? As you grow up. Right? So I would say superficial reading, unless it's something like you're in a book club or something, or you have to write a book report or some quick review or something, is a waste of your time, right? Because you're not going to actually digest the ideas and comprehend the subject matter and the vocabulary being used, right? So don't just throw yourself into topics and books because it's recommended, or you'll look cool if you're able to quote it back, right? It's stupid. Sometimes some books take a long time to read and understand, and you have to keep revisiting them, yeah? And other times books are just straightforward written and you understand the information one time through, right? So that's my take on it. If you're not a big reader, I suggest you do that too, right? And another thing that you could do is listen to audiobooks, man. I know there's a lot of platforms that you have to pay for audiobooks, but YouTube has a lot of this content there already, right? People have gone out of their way to transcribe, caption, and voice record these books for you, right? So even classic literature stuff that you may not have got taught in school, right? I do it as well. I go back and I listen, right? Because in school you would have quote unquote been put into a class system of the smart kids, the intermediate kids, and the slower kids, right? So depending on your attitude and your performance in school, you wouldn't have got the information, right? You wouldn't have got the literature that the other kids have got, right? But it's interesting now that you're an adult, you can actually understand this information, these concepts, and comprehend them and interpret them differently than you would have as a kid, right? So those classic literatures, those like books that are foundational are already audiobooks. Most of them are already audiobooks and they're free to listen to, right? So if you're not a book person, start like that, right? Get your audiobooks on your YouTube or on your app, whatever it is you use, and just task stack like we talked about before. We multitask by we 10x our productivity by multi-stacking our tasks, right? You listen to your podcast, you listen to your audiobook while you work out, while you do something creative, right? That's how you get information down, right? And another good key about that is like you create a quote-unquote neural link with that memory and that information with a time and place in your life, right? So you know, like you hear a song and it reminds you of a place and time when you heard the song. When you listen to audiobooks and podcasts and interviews, right, it also links, you also create a neural link between that new information and a place and a task in life, right? So it's easier to retain that information when you've forgotten or you think you've forgotten about the information, your memory gets jogged by a certain action or a certain task that you're doing during the day, right? So now you recall that information faster. So like I said, with books and even audiobooks, it's easy to get caught up into superficial listening for the sake of it, superficial reading, but truthfully, in all honesty, it's a waste of time, right? And you'll be filling your mind with useless information that you can't actually access and make use of, right? It's a waste of time, right? So think about that, and really ask yourself, is what you're reading, what you're studying actually important to you, right? Does it actually matter? Do you hold real interest in this topic? Because if you don't, it will only ever just be empirical data that has no real application or value to you, right? Unless, of course, you need to pass a course or a test or something, because many of us who have progressed our qualifications and stuff, we learn all of the theory fast, right? We just learn it fast, bang it out quick, right? And then 6 months down the line, after the test is done, none of that information even matters, right? It was just to pass a test, right? So when you're reading for your own personal edification, make sure you care about the subject, for one, yeah? And two, make sure you're stopping to research the language, right? And actually comprehending what's being said. Because a lot of the time, once you can cut through the noise, a lot of books are fluff, right? Especially self-help books and stuff like that, history books. A lot of it's fluff and reiterated topics, but it's done for a reason, right? So you retain the information by reading it another way and another way and another way and another way, right? But once you've actually took time to research and understand the vocabulary, you'll be able to cut through the next chapters or the next columns or whatever quicker, right? The next paragraph, sorry. You'll be able to cut through them quicker because it's reiterating the information. Like I said, I've got books that are half read, quarter read, fully read, that will always be halfway understood, right? Because I'm honest enough to know I don't really understand this yet, so I'm going to take time to go and get the background information. And what's cool about it is this: when you come back to these books, right, the first time you read through them, you would have heard certain names, you would have heard certain ideas, right? And it would have just been quote unquote superficial, very surface level understanding. When you return back after your study, after your journey of looking and learning, you actually notice them now. These names are like embossed, they're highlighted to you without being highlighted. Oh, that's that person, like, that's who he was talking about. Oh, that's what they were talking about in this subject, in this history. And now it's re-fortified, right? Now it has applicational use, the information, right? The once-over is never really good enough. You have to stop, research, and understand, and comprehend if you want to study, right? You don't even have to be studying something that's gonna, like, that's actually real hardcore intellectual subject matter, right? It could just be a biography of somebody's, right? These things all matter too, right? Even your creative writings, your fictions, right? They have a purpose too, right? They will open up pathways in your mind with the language, right? And it will improve your vocabulary, and it will make you more creative in whatever it is you're approaching, following them, right? So books are definitely a super important resource. So is audiobooks, right? So is articles and journals online. It all matters when you're trying to accumulate knowledge and information for your own well-being, own self-study, right?